Welcome back, everyone. This is the virtual ideas that matter, part 27. No, actually, it's not quite that long, but Diamond Harges privileged us with a session, and this is the continuation and expansion of that session. And as Diamond is going to be exploring stories today, he has brought 3 storytellers with him: Jeff Bennett, Pamela Ross, and Patti Scott, and I'm going to let him introduce them. They're buddies of his, and he knows them well. So over to you, Diamond, and your guest.
Well, welcome back for the MDUP version of social banking and tangible currencies. I wanted to do, like in tradition of TSI, was to do a check-in, and we're going to break out into small groups. And we're going to hold the question for 10 minutes, where you come from and what relationships matter in your life. And so when you know the rules, you're making sure everybody got a chance to talk, clearly having some type of baton process. And yeah, and then we'll come back. And what I would like for you to do, instead of us having a harvest, a oral harvest, we will be putting, taking 60 seconds to put things into the chat, and we'll go right and not hold our speakers up, and because they have a lot of rich stories. So Linda, I think you're going to take us to our groups.
I'm going to take you to the groups. I'm just going to double check that I got everybody's okay. And you're in groups of 3 or 4, and folks have 10 minutes for the check-in. And you want to state the check-in question again, Diamond?
Yes. Who are you, where you come from, and what relationships matter in your life?
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll go into the breakout groups. Diamond, I think everyone is back.
All right. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Zulu. Shut the door too, TJ. So thank y'all for the check-in. I'm glad to. It's unfortunate thing about doing virtual things. We can't be together, and we can't take more time to do the in-between stuff. So this is the best we could do right now. But for the sake of where we usually would harvest, what I'd like to do is to take 60 seconds to start putting, what did you find important about relationships into the chat? What did you find important about relationships? Put that into the chat if you feel compelled. After that, we'll move on to our next little part of this full day.
Oh, beautiful. Diamond, let Jack can take a look, and he can read out some things, or we can just make sure that people take a look at the chat and read them themselves, and you'll just take it up when you're ready.
Okay. Right, Jack, go ahead and read a couple out.
Well, relationships are more than just biological family. They include family of choice, people we collaborate with, people we support and learn from. Each plays a different role in making our lives better. Rebecca loves everyone and sees beauty in all. People are served and supported. Are in a natural part of what matters most. Relationships are with and to people, but also to places and nature and community and dogs, like Zulu. Everyone wants relationship with family and friends. Family, place, connected purpose. Some relationships are celebrated in our breakout sessions, include colleagues, kindred spirits, neighbors, our relationships with land, ourself, our spirits. The ever-expanding circle of family and found family. There are many treasures present in the people we find and many ways in which people can connect. Okay.
Thank you, Jay.
Twice.
Well, thank you. Without further ado, welcome to social banking and tangible currencies. Before we move on, I wanted to let you know there will be several currencies exhibited today. There'll be four like really poignant that I wanted people to learn about. In the chat, there will be my definitions of these social currencies and the definition of social banker. At no means as this is official, as I'm still going through and trying to figure this out. But I'm discovering some things about this. So just for your reference, this is the way I see social banking and social currency. If you find any time in the chat that something intrigues you, please put it in the chat. Put a question or comment into the chat for, during the time. Our first speaker is a friend of mine. We've been knowing each other for several years and ran into each other off and on in his different roles and my different roles. My friend Jeff Bennett has become the deputy mayor for how long, Jeff?
A little over 5 years.
So it's the second term they made it through. And I'll let him talk about just his role. But when we talk about trust, it's one of those things that often Jeff would know I'd be like very, I'm not always hanging out with politicians. So, but anyway, he has a really good story and something that intrigued me. Jeff, take a little time and introduce yourself, like your role. Tell people a little bit about what you care about, and then go into our topic.
Yeah, well, thank you, Diamond, for the opportunity to share. I've worked in community development from the nonprofit side and from the local government side for the better part of the last 25 years. And I had my first job in city government it'll be 20 years ago in June of this year. And I remember going to my first neighborhood meeting. I lived on the east side of Indianapolis, and I was going to a neighborhood meeting further on the east side of Indianapolis from where I lived. And I got asked by the people in that room who I'd never met, didn't know any of them. They didn't know me. They said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I live in Irvington," which was the neighborhood that I lived in at the time. And they said, "No, where are you from?" And I was like, what, like where I grew up. And I realized that here I am representing the mayor of Indianapolis. I grew up outside of Indianapolis in a small town west of town. But I'm getting asked where I'm from. I have no relationships with anybody in this room. I clearly have no trust of anybody in this room. How do I succeed in my job? How do I succeed in making sure that the residents that I'm serving on behalf of the mayor get their needs met? And so it was like, it has stuck with me to this day that the jobs that we have, especially like my job now and my job then, they are built on trust. They are built on strong relationships where you don't always agree, but you've got clear lines of communication. You're honest brokers back and forth, and you can exchange knowledge and ideas and work together for the sort of commonalities or the common good in the community. That has stuck with me to this day and has informed my approach in terms of city government work ever since. So I have the benefit, as Diamond mentioned, to have become the deputy mayor of community development for the city. But my job is not fundamentally different from what it was 20 years ago when I was like an entry-level employee serving as what we called a neighborhood liaison for the mayor. I am working with neighborhoods with people of the most diverse of backgrounds, but then at the same time, I'm interacting with our corporate and philanthropic and educational partners across the community. So I'm always in a group that that has different needs and different passions and different relationships and different levels of trust with government, especially. Government is not renowned for being creative, and it's not renowned for being fast. And what we've learned over the years, but in earnest over the last 12 months, is that we don't have the luxury of being slow and plodding when we are dealing with critical needs in the midst of a public health pandemic and economic crisis. And the confluence of those two events with the long needed social justice reckoning that we have come to as a community and as a society. So I've been fortunate to have relationships that have been long lasting with Diamond and with others, because that's where we can get real time information that enables us to be faster and more flexible and more responsive and more innovative as a city governmental entity. So, in addition to the sort of neighborhood level work that I get to undertake, we're also working on issues that affect our city as a whole. So those are issues like affordable housing and homelessness intervention and prevention. What is clearly happening in terms of neighborhood change, displacement, and gentrification in neighborhoods that are right outside the windows of our downtown city county building. It's been important in addressing those issues that the relationships that we have evolve. So the folks that I met 20 years ago on the East Side when I first started in city government are gone from the picture of East Side community leadership. And what has happened over the last 20 years is leadership has changed across our city. It's gotten much younger. It's gotten informal is not the word, but I would say much more passionate and hands-on than 20 years ago. And leadership has gotten much more diverse and engaged in issues that maybe 20 years ago wouldn't have registered on the radar of sort of top 5 issues in the city. So that means to me that we always have to be adjusting how we manage relationships, how we cultivate relationships, how we refresh them, and how we create new ones as our city has changed, if we're going to address challenges that didn't exist a generation ago.
Jeff, I got a question in thinking about imagination. What has happened in some of your relationships? I was thinking about with Andy and Wild Style and Pumbana and some of the grassroots folks, Valerie. What are some of the things, because of what has made you imagine different? What has happened?
Well, I mean, what has happened is, so there've been discussions going on in our community. Let's take housing affordability as an issue. Been discussions in our community going back to maybe even before the mayor that I work for took office. So when the mayor was campaigning in 2015, issues of housing affordability were coming up on the campaign trail. And there was at that time, a cohort of community leaders who were rolling up their sleeves with a series of recommendations for what might be done to address housing affordability. And over, I think, the period of the mayor's first term, some of those recommendations had begun to kind of take hold into actionable items that some that didn't need the city's support, but just sort of an understanding that the community advocates were working on them on their own and could do them on their own. But then there were some things that that definitely needed a city policy change, perhaps an ordinance change, that we have continue to work hand in hand with the groups that articulated those ideas to begin with. And it's sort of the philosophical approach of the mayor has been, it works way better when ideas for what government can do come from the neighborhoods as opposed to coming from the government and like sort of bestowed or done to neighborhoods or communities. And so, the group that Diamond mentioned has been one that has enabled us to be creative in how we develop and implement housing policy. And I would give an even more concrete example as we began to get CARES Act dollars from the federal government in response to the pandemic last, April, May. We were able to call upon some of our trusting relationships with community-based organizations to help us think about how to get those funds into the hands of people who needed them the most. And that relationship, that back and forth dialogue, which, probably started out a little bit tense because we were all under tremendous pressure in the midst of the beginnings of the pandemic. But I think it has evolved into a very productive kind of back and forth exchange of ideas that I think has really enabled us to finally tailor some of the assistance that we've provided to make sure we're targeting communities and individual households who've been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And that remains a work in progress, but it could not have happened in any way without the relationships that we've developed and I think at least a basic level of trust that we could speak frankly to one another about what's working and what's not in terms of pandemic relief.
And Jeff, one more thing I was just wanted to say, you talked about imagination, but also you used a lot of your social capital. Like with that CARES Act money, you literally said, hey, let's reallocate from places that had a bunches of it and use your relationship coming back to just some stuff, even when Pam Ross involvement, just being able to prototype a new way. So data, you got new data. So
yeah, and the new way is working, and we have another allocation of local dollars for rental assistance, and we'll have soon another allocation of federal dollars for rental assistance. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now we can go back to what's working at the micro level and at the macro level and just refund those existing relationships and those existing programs. So that's really exciting. And then I guess, can I say one thing about WildStyle's article? I know my time's probably up, but I was really pleased to see that was suggested reading for this group. So the relationship that we've managed to build between WildStyle and myself has been an interesting one, and it really just began as a series of conversations about kind of Indianapolis history and neighborhoods and neighborhood change, and I think from my perspective, when we're in the roles of city government, we inherit all of the baggage that comes with city government over the last 100 years, or in Indianapolis's case, the last 200 years, because we're celebrating our 200th birthday of the first 200th anniversary of the first white settlers of Indianapolis. WildStyle's article has continued to resonate with me because of the personal nature of it to him. He has family who are not distant family, but parents and grandparents that were impacted directly and negatively by white policies bestowed on a Black neighborhood over the course of now, almost 100 years. For his family, more like 60 to 70 years. But we are utterly and unforgivably responsible for the destruction of a Black neighborhood and Black culture in Indianapolis. And we have to keep that in mind and front and center as we think about all the policies that I mentioned that we're working on related to affordable housing and everything else. because we can't begin to heal as a city or move forward to become the Indianapolis that we want to become without sort of reconciling this past that in some cases isn't even over yet. And so I wasn't kidding when I told Wildstyle and Diamond a couple weeks ago that like I keep that article like up on my phone and refer to it frequently as a guiding principle for our sort of philosophical approach to Indianapolis past and Indianapolis present and future.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, I appreciate you coming to take some time doing this. If y'all have questions, throw them into Jeff. Jeff, I know it's 2:30. You went past your limit, and I appreciate this, especially in this time in our city. So, thank you for your friendship and allowing us in the community to even text you sometimes. So,
oh no, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, good. Well, I really thank you all for tuning into that. So I'm going to just give y'all a few minutes to put some questions in. Start putting your questions in. The other currency that I failed to discover is grace. There have been times too, just thinking about grace as a currency because, the story he told about Wildstyle. Wildstyle feels a type of way. The language he used in the article is ethnic cleansing. Right, his family lived there, and so it takes a lot. And Wildstyle thinks a lot of Jeff, and it really made the connection to me and Jeff also. So as we go, I want to introduce my next friend. I call her Boss Ross, but she is friend. But she's one of the best bosses I ever seen. She is the vice president of equity and inclusion at Central Indiana Community Foundation, also known as CICF. She is a devoted mom. Our kids are grown, grandmother. You wouldn't tell her by her age how beautiful she is. Mm-hmm. And what a great leader, a very non-traditional leader. And Pam, tell people where you come from. Tell a little bit about background about the organization you help run.
Sure. So thank you for your graciousness, but also Diamond is my boss. I'm not his. He continues to tell that story that's not true. I am originally from Indianapolis. I have lived in quite a few other cities in the country and thought I was going to settle in Phoenix, Arizona, and moved back to Indianapolis in 2016, specifically to work at CICF. My background has always been in community-based work, so I've done things as far as direct services as well as macro work in directing and managing programs within the community-based organizations. I'm innately drawn to people and innately very committed to mankind. One of the things in my plan of my career was that I would work for a foundation. After I thought that perhaps I had gained enough experience, which was intentional, I wanted to make sure I understood what was happening on the ground before I started sitting at tables of power and influence and resources in the community. I wanted to make sure I understood what that is. And so once I got that under my belt, then I started applying at foundations and just found that I was not getting in the door. And so I finally decided to try again. And as it turned out, that's what was going to bring me back to Indianapolis. And then once I got there, finding out that we were focused on racial equity, not calling it that right away, but everyone on our staff was going through a racial equity training called Undoing Racism. So for me, right up, and that wasn't a part of my interview process. So I was pretty taken aback. Like, I don't understand why we're having this kind of conversation at work. And so that was really the beginning for me of a conversation with the president of the foundation, even though I didn't report to him, because I really needed to understand what's your end game here. because you're asking me to bring my skills and experiences. That's what I interview for. But really, at the end of the day, if we're really going to do this work, you're asking me to trust the process, even if I don't totally right off the bat trust you. And you're asking me to bring my full self, which means you're asking me to come in as this Black woman who does have 3 grown kids and has quite a few grandkids, 9 to be exact. Not at that time, but 9 now, 4 years later. And, you know, that's just not something that's an easy request. So what are we trying to do? So as we continue to figure out where we were going, and what our new strategic plan was going to be, we changed our mission, even though we're a 104-year-old white power institution. My boss also felt like we had to have someone at an executive level in the organization who every day was living and breathing the direction of the organization, not just from a place of accountability and challenge, but that is a big part of my job also, but in a place of grace and support. And I thought a lot going into it, there was going to be, you know, primarily just internal, but definitely, you know, I guess I was just naive, I suppose, but it's a lot of external too. So it is, how does CICF and the work that we do influence the work that Jeff talked about with the city? We have a great relationship with the city and a great relationship with Jeff. But wherever space I'm in, how am I not just leveraging dollars, but how am I leveraging power and influence to help others who have power and influence and resources to understand that we need to not just be talking about who is in poverty and the issues around economic mobility and jobs, but we need to really start talking about who is actually the worst, who is actually being impacted the most, and come to some truth about systemic racism is still alive and well. So now, you know, as I'm waiting to get on this call, I see that our new president is being very explicit about it, which just gives us more space to do the work. But 3 years ago, we were definitely like out there as a unicorn. Like, you know, so are you really going to talk about race? You know, are you stirring it up? You know, racism doesn't still exist. And so 2020.
Y'all got all called all type of names too.
Yeah. I know, quietly, well, we found out, but not to our face. And I'm sure still now, you know, but without a doubt, because we're fighting against what has been, and that's very much a culture of white supremacy. So it's not, and I, you know, last I'll just say, Dee, it's still very much important to me, as you know, that our work is internal first. We started out with very much, I was laying the ground like, you have to be humble in this. It doesn't matter what race, you're going to have to be humble, because you're going into spaces that are very painful and sensitive, and there's so much that we don't understand. So I'm always paying attention more so to what we're doing than what others are doing, is always my tactic, because we have to be the ones to walk the talk.
Saying that, tell us a little bit about these ambassadors and how you engage Learning Tree, because that's to me, that's a little soft spot, because I remember I felt.
I know, you can probably tell it better than me.
Tell apart what you didn't understand. You mentioned it all the time.
Recognize? Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So now, what are we, like in our 3rd year of? So one of the first things going into my job was to continue a relationship that started prior to me, that wasn't expected to be a relationship at the time. It was more so, how do we engage residents to inform us of our new strategic plan? In short, what we found is there wasn't a new data about what residents want in their lives and in their neighborhoods and for their children and their families. What we found is that as an institution, we needed to have direct conversations, direct influence with residents, not just through other institutions. So meaning our grantees tell us the outcomes or tell us what's happening in their neighborhoods, that we need to actually engage directly with residents. So that was the first thing that I was tasked with. We originally started, when we went to get the information, we had, I think, 36 residents. representing different populations, different geographic areas, different identities. But we started out with 6 because I knew that was probably going to be the most manageable number, giving the essence of what's most important, and that's the relationship. So we all had to get to know each other. I had to get to know my position. I was still trying to get to know CICF. I'd only been there for 18 months. I was still trying to understand to what degree are we really, really in this space of dismantling systemic racism. The ambassadors, a couple of them knew each other, but most did not know each other. And so, and did not know CICF. So there was a lot about that relationship that went beyond just coming together in a room and trying to figure out what's next. One of the biggest things that I stuck to and still stick to is that we had no agenda. And so when you have residents typically come to the table with institutions, with power, with resources, they're looking, not desiring, but looking, because this is how institutions work, looking for us to say, here's what we want from you. Whether it's we want your opinion, we want you to go out to the neighborhoods and do a survey, we want you to do something. My thing was, I don't want anything, we don't want anything from you other than for you to help us learn how to do better. So you tell us what should be our agenda. So we flipped the script, like, what's our agenda? And it was really, even in that, it was so ambiguous. Now I have multiple syllable words. It was so ambiguous. Yeah, it was so muddy that time became a very big factor real quick, because as institutions, we want to have deadlines, timelines, outcomes. We got it all planned out. This wasn't that. So as I was trying to work through my institutional thinking with my organizing soul, I feel like I can do this. I have been able to do it effectively, but not without mistakes, because I am the community, and I always represent as the community, and I always feel like I have an organizing mindset more than I have an institutional one. But from working in institutions for so long, from getting 2 degrees from I know how institutions work. And so trying to merge those two to make sure that we had something really authentic. And so what Diamond is talking about, though, is that the whole time, I never knew that they were feeling like anything but the greatness that I was feeling. Like, yeah, this is great. We're all together. We're going to make this happen. Come on. And they were kind of like, I don't know,
well,
not really.
It kind of diffused us too, because we let you know at one point, like, we wasn't feeling it, and you was like, well, I didn't realize that. But the special thing about it, why we even let it get that far, because you actually did listen, and we did not believe. We was like talking after the meeting, it was like, this sounds like a trap. I don't know. Let's see, and some of the best people in the room, I mean, in the city. I mean, you had Wild Style, Beatrice, Valerie had started to come, and she her and Wild Style become housing czars in the city. I mean, but that was so important. And I was like, I wanted Pam to tell that story, because I think she came in it with belief. It was something she came in with, and it like translated through to us. I always felt like her colleague, boss, the president, is a friend of mine, and I was just always skeptical, and we've been good friends. And and so, but when Pam came in, she taught us something about what leadership could often looks like, and is the people who address power first. Mm-hmm. And so that was Pam, that was very powerful. But tell some of the highlights of your time with us. I mean, we're a heck of a group too. We give it to you at the meetings. But...
yeah, I mean, that's true, and I love the fact, Dee, that you put this in the whole essence of. I came with the, talking about currency. I mean, that was my currency. I just believed that this could happen. I believed that we could do something different. I believed that even though explicitly I wasn't given the power to do that, I was assigned to say, grow this relationship. And so, every opportunity that would come about for voice, so it's first around relationships and making sure that the staff knew who the ambassadors were. That took time, because again, I wanted to make sure we were good before I brought in, anyone else. So that meant staff, and then I had to make sure we were good before I brought in any people in the community who would hear, oh, I hear you have these CICF ambassadors. We like to talk to them. And so for me, I was a gatekeeper for a long time of like, well, what do you want to talk to them about? Because I was still trying to protect our relationship with them. And I didn't ever want them to be exploited, that it would become, because of the power of CICF and because you're with residents, and I'm going to try to find a way here to make it appear like we really want to be in this space. But after I talk to your ambassadors, we're still going to do what we've been doing. And so everything from like what Jeff talked about with the rental assistance, we have influenced those dollars. Last year when we had to pivot funds as it relates to organizations getting relief from COVID in whatever way it needed to come to residents, the ambassadors sat at the table with our program officers to make decisions about proposals, influenced the fact that 86 cents out of every dollar went directly into residents' hands for groceries and for utilities and transportation, things like that. It continues to evolve to a space where it is very clear internally that this whole thing of shared power has been executed as an expectation of how we operate. And so the ambassadors are an example of sharing the power, because what we don't have is the power and influence in the communities, because we don't live in the communities, kind of like what Jeff said when people ask, like, where are you from? We don't, some of us may live in aspects of the community. We're not leaders in the community, don't work in the community every day. And so that type of influence brings in the trust. So you can be an institution with the greatest program that really actually may benefit. But if you haven't gotten resident voice to see, like, is this really something that they desire or that will work for them? And then two, there's no messenger. There's no messenger of the fact that the resource exists. There's no one to give it credibility. Then you just have a program. And we have to get away from that, just having programs and saying that these programs are for this group of people or this part of the city, and they have not been brought into the process. So the ambassadors have just been crucial to that, and they have been an example. And earlier this morning, my boss, the president, and I were on a national call with other community foundations to do work specifically around racial equity. And what we elevated, and what he would say I elevated really, and he took it to the next level, is the whole thing about power and leadership. And so we just really believe if we hone in on power and leadership, we will start to see how that infiltrates into the systems, how that infiltrates into our communities, whether it's grass tops or grassroots, and that it has to be shared, and leadership cannot be its typical, who's recognized the most. That's how you recognize the person. But in the communities, Diamond is a leader. Now nationally he is too, but there's several of Diamond's neighbors who are also leaders, and we need to know them. So it's a much deeper essence of sharing, not just the challenges and the issues, but sharing the solutions and sharing the power of getting the solutions and honoring those ideas. And lastly, I'll just say, D, yesterday I had a conversation with another really awesome grassroots leader like Diamond. His name is Imhotep Adisa, and we were talking about something. And I think I told him I was going to hold on to it. So this is like my second or third time in less than 24 hours using this, but this is how profound it was to me. And I think it's applicable in this conversation about relationships. But his thing is, if he's going to get into relationships of any kind, business, friends, whatever, that he has three things that have to be there. And it's that they have to be authentic, they have to be transparent, and they have to be reciprocal. And I think that when we're looking at the work, especially within institutions, if we really value relationships, then at a minimum, we will look at those particular things and put it in you all's words as actual currency.
Thank you. And here's three practices that Pam brings to the table to an institution, and I think it's shifting policy. One, you heard she commits to listen, so we got that. But the one she thinks she does as a practice is deep listening. So she'll even take walks with the rest of the ambassadors and say, just take me to lunch with your friends. Like, that's not a common thing to do. The other is that when there's things that are important shifts, she's not just asking us to bring ourselves as leaders, but to bring our neighbors. So what she has done is created this space for not just me and Wild Style and the other ambassadors who are really awesome, but helped us create a kind of fabric where when something important is happening and it affects us, those people who are affected by it have to have a voice, and it's not us. So so just to be clear, one, we don't work for Pam directly, though we are a part of her team. She has one of the most interesting teams in the country. Mm-hmm. But also that she says she requires for us to have our own agency. And so being that, when it's a big issue, we was with a big foundation the other day, and she didn't say not a word, but to make sure that the people who were at the table who had power to listen. So she's very crafty, just the way she do things. So anyway.
You're very kind.
So let's thank you, Pam. That was brilliant. Thank you for having your time, because I already know what phone calls you've been on and coming on. And if y'all have questions or comments, I saw some beautiful descriptions of currencies that I haven't even thought of going into the space. It's beautiful. And if Pam, if we got questions like Gone Beyond, would you be willing to like send them back to Inclusion Press and we can get them out to all the people that are on this call?
Absolutely. And Diamond, I would love to have what is in the chat also. So I think that, this is just, thank you, Linda. This is given an opportunity for us to create, to further our narrative and take it, continue to connect all the dots, because what I see in here also is just absolutely phenomenal. So I appreciate you letting me be in this space and all that you're doing.
Oh man, go.
Okay.
So much.
I have a 3:00. So.
All right. See you later. Love you.
All right. Love you too. Thanks a lot. Nice to see everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. So 2 powerful stories. Patti, you ready to go right into, or do you want to take a minute for people to just...
Well, maybe this is an opportunity to just reiterate that we've posted, and I'll post again, the definitions in the chat, Diamond, of the currencies, and reiterate the invitation for people to reflect on the currencies that they're hearing as the story is unfolding in the chat, as I think that's been a really rich side conversation. And also just to let you know that we've enabled transcript and closed captioning. So you can, if you are on the most current version of Zoom, you'll see that under More on the bottom of your toolbar, and you can click on Live Transcript and enable it, and you can show the subtitles, or you can turn them off so that you don't see them. I'm saving both things from the chat, the transcript, the closed captioning, and I will share those subsequently with everyone as well. And just a final reminder before you go on that you all have control between whether or not you see speaker view or gallery view.
Well, good. So thank you for, I think this is wonderful having the transcription piece though. Really love that. And just to say, I just wanted to also remind you, I've been part of this group, Inclusion Press, for a while and benefited from the relationships, but also the attempt to, the people who are here today because this group of people allowed me to prototype and experiment and be who I am in the work. So I appreciate that. So none of this is like in a vacuum. So most of you know Patti, but I want to introduce Patti in a different way that like y'all might get introduced to her. So just a kind of a short story. Like I think of Patti as a little general. And tough, very, very witty, in charge, but also I think a person that is super aware of just like her surroundings. I'm thinking about the time, one of my most famous times ended up in the barbershop at Trenton with her. And clearly she was like, I'm usually the outcast, and she was the outcast. And in the sense, she was the outsider, being one of probably only few women, but there was one person that was Caucasian, but then Patti was the white woman in the room. But I remember her being patient, and then all of a sudden, slowly, people took her serious in the conversation. So that kind of sums it up, but also very adventurous. I think I'm happy I think part of the idea of social banking came out of some conversation with her and Dave in the airport. And so that was some of the beginnings of the work. Patti.
Thank you. That's a lovely introduction. And I just want to say one of the most fun afternoons I ever spent was in that barber shop. It's very cool. It's like a whole world in a barber shop. And it's not like you go in and you get your shave. You go in and you spend like 2 or 3 hours and you hang out and you have conversation. It was very cool. So it's hard, in my opinion, to follow Jeff and Pam, but I'm going to give it a go. Diamond and I are going to talk a little bit about story as a capital and or as a currency. And part of what story does is it makes some of the power of community visible. But we were having a conversation yesterday as well. It's not only is it a currency in its own right, but it amplifies other currencies. So we were coming up with these banking analogies, but if you have the currency of trust and you can tell the story of trust, it's almost like earning interest on the trust by telling the story. I don't know if anyone got to see the video of the Learning Tree House concert. Linda and Jack had sent out the link for that. And if you didn't see it, you should, because it was just an awesome thing to be at and to participate in. But the video's been viewed like thousands of times now. And so there was that one night where there were all these currencies on display, but every time that video gets shown, it's like the value of that one night of currency is growing because more and more people are getting exposed to it. And the other thing we were talking about yesterday that I thought was pretty interesting is how these currencies all tie together. So we're gonna share the story of an experience we had together about a story and how it is a currency. But there are so many other currencies that will show up in that story. So all of this stuff really ties together and I think we saw it in some with Pam and Jeff, as some of these stories are coming into play, other stories grow from them. So unlike Jeff and Pam, I'm in an organization. We are funded by a system that supports people with the label of disability. And for me, a big part of the work day in and day out is trying to break out of that system and be in community and not be in the system, because the whole purpose of the system is to get people money. And so, the money they're entitled to so that they can have a life, and life doesn't happen in the system, life happens in the community. And so we do all kinds of different things to try and help people be in the community, and not just the people we work for, but the people who work for them. What we really want is for everybody to be out in the community to do what we need to do in order for people to get their funding, but really for our focus to be in the communities where people live and where they spend time. So this particular story focuses on Kim and Candace, and Kim is on the left and Candace is on the right. And one of the things we've been doing in helping people be out in the community is getting to know the neighborhoods. Because if you know somebody's neighborhood, there's all different kinds of wonderful discoveries that can be made there. And it was, I think, in January, 2 years ago. It was a cold, rainy, awful day. This picture was not taken on that day. Diamond and I were going to go up to the neighborhood that Candace had just moved into, and Kim who was originally from that area, was helping to get to know the neighborhood. And we were going to go and walk around the neighborhood and just explore and discover and see what was there and see what the possibilities were. And we got up to Candace's house, which nothing is close in New Jersey. I mean, it's a small state, but anywhere you want to go, you have to drive an hour and 15 minutes to get there. So we got there and we sat in traffic and we got to Candace's house and we were thinking about walking, but literally it's a downpour, like with umbrellas, we're still getting wet. And on our way there, Diamond says, and we have this whole we're going all over the place. We have this whole big day planned. He said, I got a note from somebody and she wants me to meet a woman named Mindy Philolove. And Mindy lives not far from Candace. So we're going to go meet Mindy. And I'm thinking, where are we going to meet Mindy? What are we going to do? How is this going to fit into the day? We didn't really have any plan for this, but we got in the car and we drove about 2 blocks away to this woman, Mindy's house. And it's just it's a house there in a neighborhood. And it felt a little weird because there were lots of cars around and it was obvious she had people at her house. And of course, we don't know anybody in the house. But we knocked on the door and we went in there and we went in kind of like, with our hair wet and our makeup running because we've been standing in the pouring rain waiting to get in. And we get in the house and there are like 20 plus people sitting around a table in Mindy's dining room. None of them know who the heck we are.
And we have no idea. We have
none at all. But they're polite. They're very polite. And so Mindy's daughter invites us into the kitchen and offers us a bagel and has conversation with us while they continue their conversation around the table. It turns out they're all involved with something called the University of Orange. They were having their staff meeting and we essentially crashed their staff meeting. And the University of Orange is this kind of local community-based learning center where the citizens of the community come together and teach each other and offer classes and offer sessions. And we stayed for maybe 15 or 20 minutes in what I feel was one of the most 15 or 20 awkward minutes of my life. I mean, if you ever went somewhere where you felt like you totally didn't belong, you didn't know how to leave without being rude, you knew they wanted you to go, but you didn't know how to get out. And so we finally left. We said goodbye to everybody. We went back to the car and we're driving around and we get and seeing the neighborhood and Kim is showing us the places she knew and she cared about. And we get this phone call from the friend of Diamond's that said you had to meet Mindy. And it turns out, we didn't know this going in, and none of these people knew it, but it turns out that not only did Mindy start this University of Orange thing, and now we're Googling too and taking a look. She's actually pretty famous and she's written books and she's, won awards and done all these kind of things. But what they were doing at their staff meeting that morning was doing a book study of this book, which was written by Mike Mather. And Diamond is highlighted in the book. Of course, they don't know who we are, and they don't know that the book that they're talking about and thinking about how they bring it into their work is written with a big piece of it about the guy who was sitting in their kitchen. So we decided we can do something with this because the University of Orange does really cool stuff. So the next day, Kim went over and dropped off some cookies for Mindy and a note and an apology in the note saying something along the lines of, we're sorry we interrupted, but it was so nice to meet you. And hey, did you know that was Diamond from the book who was with us? And Mindy called her back almost immediately. She left her phone number. Mindy called her back. She hadn't really been all that interested in the cookies, but she loved the idea of the personal handwritten note and card. And she got together with Kim and Candace and they had some coffee and they talked. And it turns out one of the many things the University of Orange does is that they do monthly dinners. And the idea that came out of all of this, and this is where this social capital comes into it all and your social connections, was that Mike was going to come to New Jersey about 2 months down the road. Mike Mather, the guy who wrote the book, and he was just so happening he was going to stay with us. He was doing a couple keynotes at Princeton University. We sort of volunteered Mike to speak at their monthly dinner during the time that he was going to be here. And Candace hosted Mike. It happened to be the month of Passover Seder. So this was their Seder dinner, and this was a bunch of people at the dinner. And Candace hosted Mike. So there's Mike and Candace. And unfortunately, the only picture I have of this, I happen to be in it too, which doesn't excite me. But Candace hosted Mike. So Candace entered into this group with her connections with Mike, who is like literally a legend to the group. It turns out they built the University of Orange. They talked to Diamond and Mike like 10 years earlier, and they on the phone. So they had never met each other, but they had talked to them and they had based what they were doing on the work that Diamond and Mike were doing. And Candace was the person who sponsored Mike to be there for this Seder dinner. And so Candace entered into the group as someone with just a ton of social capital and as someone who was just a really important person. She would have been anyway. I mean, they're wonderful, warm, open people. The group does all kinds of stuff. So here's Candace at some of the different events. They have a Hub City music kind of thing, and Candace became a volunteer at the music thing and was a singer in some of the singing events, and they did concerts all summer. And so she's part of that. And the idea, so you'll hear some things in here that I think are currencies. The idea of the curiosity of going into Mindy's house, as intimidating as it was, the idea of the connections, the idea of the hospitality of bringing the cookies and the note afterwards. The idea of continuing to build the story over time, because it's not just getting into the University of Orange and becoming a part of that, but it's how can we keep building the story. And one of the other things that I just wanted to touch on at the end here is the imagination that goes into it. One of the things that's right there in Orange is this big park. And that was one of the places they took us to on the first day. And we drove around it because it was raining and we didn't get out there and walk. But Candace loves walking. And there's this park. And what it led to was that fall, something called the Candace Cares Walk. And they posted the walk. It was a community walk for people who cared about fitness. They raised some money for something local in the community. Candace's connections at the University of Orange came. People who knew people invited those people and they came. And it was, it matches one of Candace's passions, which is walking, and people were outside, and it turned into something else because they imagined that they could do something more with these connections that Candace started to have. And some of these things have continued on during the pandemic. There's a socially distanced in the park yoga course that Candace participates in. And so there's things that kind of have continued, but the idea of using these currencies to help people build what their connections are going to be in the community, not just Candace, but also Kim, what her connections are going to be and how her current connections can be part of it has been something that's really useful. And one of the things that I think about when I think about our work is the big excuse around a lot of stuff is that there's never enough money, but like none of this stuff really costs any money. This isn't about money. This is about using all these alternative currencies to build connections and to make things happen. And if you do, things can happen for people, for Candace, for the people who work for Candace, for Kim, for Diamond and I, who have broadened our connections because of this and broadened our ideas because of this. So
Patti, you landed it. And I wanted to say why I picked the people I picked. If you notice that most of the times where we're in this group, we're talking about the people who have been affected by it. But if you don't know that right now, then that's your fault. That people, they come around us every day. But I wanted to illustrate the currencies that people that have influence and figuring out using imagination in ways that change policy. And I think that the work that Candace and crew is doing in New Jersey is going to affect policy, and give it some time, right? But in about 2 years, the story is going to infect that state, and you'll have a whole new abundance pandemic going on. The other thing that I really think that if you paid attention, I think, and especially in the case of Patti and Pam, somebody put it in there, courage is a currency. And I watched, not just by her, it wasn't her just, I knew she would step in the house with me. I knew she would follow me. That wasn't the point. The point would be that she did things that made room for space for people to use their courage. So deciding not to go to a meeting that doesn't have to improve the life of people, even when it's $1 million, right? And so that's powerful. That is a space. If any change is going to be made, it has to be made at that level. Or Pam saying, instead of me coming and talk to the governor's office, I got a crew of people you can talk to. Blam, right in front of the governor. And so, or saying, hey, I know some people who can shift CARES Act money and not be afraid to put it in the millions. Right? Here's a group of people. That takes courage. Like, yes, we have courage on the ground, but it takes this joint. This needs to be going all through and through. So that when people make an excuse for why they can't do anything, I wanted to show that here's people that are doing changes, right? At the levels where we say, oh, we can't do it because of this. So anyway, so I want to take a pause there. Patti, did you?
Just one more thing. I think the idea of time is important too, and it's where you put your time. Like Diamond, when he comes to New Jersey, he puts his time walking around neighborhoods, and I actually put my time with the people who work for the organization, and the people we work for, walking around neighborhoods. There's something that shifts the thinking of what's important by where you put your time, so it's not the words, it's kind of where you actually put your time and energy.
So I want to give us a chance to have conversations with ourselves about what's bubbling up and kind of doing a cafe style conversation with 3 questions. And I guess, Linda, you're going to put those in the chat, or do you want to talk about those breakouts, like as far as like the timing of it? And I can talk about the questions.
Yeah, I'm going to post the 3 questions, and Diamond, it's going to be helpful for me to hear again how you want to use the breakouts. What I thought was that you wanted 3 different breakouts, and you were going to bring people back after each breakout.
Each breakout.
Okay,
Yeah,
so,
and then
but we're going to show. You want to show all the questions at once right now?
Just show one question. We can show them one at a time.
Okay. Yes, dear. All right.
And with the questions, what we'll do is have the same type of cadence that we did, and just discussing the question: who are the social bankers, and how do we use their gifts to improve humanity? And these are people in your life. Want to do that, and then when you come back, immediately start putting those into the chat. And then I'll have Jack, if you could help us harvest those. And then we'll go back into the next set of questions.
Okay, and Diamond, you'd like folks to have 8 minutes to talk about this?
Yes.
Okay, it is done. Folks, you just get transported automatically, as you know, and you'll get beamed back without doing anything. It can help if you join the group, but it will take you there.
So is everybody's back already? Let me go.
They are.
Yep.
Now there is everybody. So I'd like for let's take 3 oral harvests from people. First come, first serve, and then I'll have Jack read them out, and we'll go back into our next. Read some of the things you might put into your harvest. So start putting some of your feedback around what you had, what bubbled up in your group. And who wants to go first? I can't see everybody, but you could just blurt it out twice.
I think I'll share.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Denite. I'm calling from Mississauga, so it's a small city in Ontario, Treaty 13A lands. I think it was interesting to think about this question for me because it made me reflect on community that's not necessarily my neighborhood. For me, community looks a little different because I'm not necessarily connected to my neighborhood. And that was an interesting thing to think about. But when I think about my parents and their generation who immigrated here and the community that they've been able to kind of create through social capital and wanting to form connections of trust and some semblance of home while not being home. So I think that, yeah, this question is so interesting, and hearing our group's reflections, it was, yeah, I think this one is a seed I'm going to have to really sit with. But thank you.
Good. It's a good question. Anybody else? Jack, would you read off a few of the...
Well, Joshua mentioned that he's thinking about Bruce Anderson and the gift of culture, and they discussed the sharing of gifts and social capital, people and lasting relationships. A watcher, a protector, witness of community. It's pro-social, leaning into one another. A person that brings people together because he sees them, sharing the power. Musicians know to make it their vocation to bring people together and connect people with something they love, music. Discuss the power of currency and shared stories and experiences. Taking a walk in your neighborhood is a great way to discover your social banker in your neighborhood.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. All right, on to our next question. We're going to do a little bit smaller group. Again, be intent on listening to one another. You'll have it'll be a little bit more richer conversation since we're going into threes. But the next question is, what social currencies do you use most in your calling or your work? What social currencies do you use most in your calling or your work?
So I'm posting it there so everyone can see it. Folks are in small breakout groups. Diamond just confirmed for me you want the group to be for how long?
7 minutes.
Okay, so it's 7 minutes, folks, and then there'll be a 1 minute countdown. Thanks, everybody. Okay, you got them all.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. And this has been a full packed day, huh? I'd love to start out. I think Amy, in her group, she would represent talking a little bit about what she discovered in her group.
And if people can contribute to the chat while she's doing that, so we can get a flavor of everybody.
Thank you. So we definitely went round about trust and stories were two of the main themes that came across, and the ability to the great ability of stories to help people to communicate with each other rather than being talked, make it a communicative, make it a conversation rather than kind of informative, and how trust is so very, very, very powerful in any kind of scenario, right? That there kind of wasn't one specific space where that was the best, but that it really could be used for all of them. And how grateful we are for this space to be able to, like, this is almost a refresher, and not even a refresher, but just a refreshing, just sort of wave of coolness so we can sit in a space with some really great people and have these wonderful conversations. So lots of gratitude for being able to be here.
Can take one more person? Anybody want to share some wisdom from the crew? All right, Jack, go ahead and
So from Jess, some of the, anyway, gifts, creativity, cultural creatives, the artists, musicians, quilters, people who step out of silos and make shit up. Fearlessness, yes, everybody needs it. Curiosity, not knowing, not understanding, the need to understand, relationship building and connecting. Seeing people's gifts, seeing what they bring to the big pot, relentless building relationship in community, telling the story, building the story. That's important in the long run. Remembering. There's got to be a lot of people who can remember. Mark the old landmarks. Find someone who remembers and witness over time, carry their stories. Artists and storytellers. Intuition. That's capital. Seeing gifts, paying attention to things around you. Wisdom, connection between all the currencies of trust, empathy, time, storytelling, humility, listening. There's a virtual environment for those of us with disabilities. And there are community connectors, with each with their own flavor, using active listening, place, and humor.
So
stories.
So Jack, they do get it. Yeah, y'all do get this. Everybody gets this.
Yep.
I think the problem is that we haven't built a fabric around remembering that. And so what we're going to do, oftentimes we leave these places making these grand commitments. But I'd like for you to share on one-on-ones in this last session. And how much time did we say, Linda? Do you remember?
We said 5 minutes because we were going to use 1 minute per person and then 2 minutes to talk to each other.
Yes. And so you'll be breaking out into an individual conversation with someone else. And your question is, what will you do with this content after leaving here? What will you do with what you learned or rediscovered? All right. Everybody back. So I guess Patty's going to help me cultivate this conversation. Patty, you suggested we talk with each other?
No, I just thought, well, I think people should put stuff in the chat again, what they intend to do with the content. But I just thought this very last question, what people's intentions are from here, people might want to share a couple of those things. Because I personally always like putting my intention out there, putting it out there verbally is a useful thing for me. So does anybody want to do that?
Sure. I was going to say, let me start with an intention. So this has been an experiment. I just pulled a contract with a bank, and I am experimenting with utilizing these currencies. They put me in charge of saying what communities are overlooked, and how do we figure out a way to put money in their hands and lift their stories up to value their currency. So I am starting with the United States, but probably venture off into North America, Central America, but to really put money directly into their hands. So the job is to take communities and not just fund them for one time, but create a relationship through banking that the fees will go to people. So this helped me. Some of the things y'all put in the chat really also helped me. I didn't realize, like the word witness that I saw in there, and the word courage, and some of the other currency, grace, helps me think about that. Somebody else, was it Tom? Did Tom Kohler? Who else was about to say something?
I said I would share. I think we have a lot. So I struggle with the fact that I think people's stories get lost in what we do in terms of the field of working and supporting people with disabilities. But in general, people's stories get lost. People get lumped into becoming a series of behaviors that need to get solved, and they lose who they are and some of their humanity in that process. They lose the story of why somebody should go work someplace else has got nothing to do with what their disability is. It has everything to do with, here's what I know how to do, and here's why you need to have this done, and let's make a match that way. Or as they say in Yiddish, a shidduch. And I guess my big takeaway is going back, and I have staff who really work hard at this, but I want to reclaim people's stories in so many ways. We spend so much time pushing against the expediency of things, the need to get this next thing done tomorrow, and why are we waiting, and giving lip service to the real work, that I feel inspired to go back and kind of push harder the other way.
Feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll take a little courage here and jump in. I just finished a tiny film that actually Darona's husband did with me, with 3 gentlemen in South Georgia who were looking for work, who attend a day center and all live in a group home. And we were linking in the film the notion about rural transportation and the need in this state for publicly funded transportation. It's a big issue for lots of people, but linking that with employment. And what I heard by meeting some people in Statesboro when I was there was that the mayor was really interested in transportation. So there's my entree. I thought, well, I'll just call the mayor and tell him we have a little film to show him, and invite myself and the 3 gentlemen who are the feature people in the film. And I thought about just sitting with him, and after he sees the film, just talking about even introducing the language, if it seems right, like who holds the stories in this community, even introducing the idea of social banking, if it seems like that language would work with him. But just the idea of seeing if this mayor was interested in joining with these 3 gentlemen and people they know in connecting around some social currencies. I don't know. It would be a complete experiment. I have no idea who the mayor is, but I thought I might try it.
Awesome, thank you. I wanted to go back to Jessica, put a question in. Would you read your question, Jessica?
Away.
How do we recenter our humanity, and how do we recenter the humanity of others using these currencies?
I think that is
a
an
good
awesome
takeaway.
Yeah. You want to say a little bit more about that, Jessica? Tell us some more.
I think that that's just sort of the question that was coming up when I was hearing people sharing back. But it's also it also to me speaks to the question that we hold in the work that I do, which is around self-determination. And how are we practicing that in ourselves? And a lot of it has to do with like carving out space for us to feel what it means to have our humanity respected and have our humanity invested in. And I think the opposite of that is just having to like respond and react and to just survive. So it's like moving from this place of survival to thriving, but beyond thriving, like this, like building for the future, which is, I think is like that beautiful space that is just like so close and on the edge of everything that we're doing and the community work that we're doing. So that's just something that I think is a question to hold and to come back to.
It's one to hold, and probably one we should leave on. It's very powerful. That jumped at me. I just want to first, my guest Patti's here, and my other 2 guests aren't, but thank for their willingness to be vulnerable and share their stories. I'd like to thank Linda and Jack and Kathy and all the Inclusion Press crew for sharing this, and all of you for even entertaining me in this experiment in faces I knew. So this was cool. Love you, Tom. I'm glad you made it. That's
Good night,
Tom Kohler. So good. I'm
Me
done.
too.
I'm done. Linda, you want to close us out?
Oh, I
Jack?
just wanted to say if we have people enter a closing word in the chat, and you know that you'll hear from us with little feedback to your hosts, and we'll let you know in that email what's coming next.
Right. And I will get back. If you got questions for the three guests, please send them on to us, and we will get them to answer you as much as they can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks so much.